We're going to send our Webflow form submissions to Airtable and dynamically create new tables for every form on our website. Then submit all of our submissions as records in each of these tables. It all works using this N8N workflow. You don't have to add any custom code to your Webflow or create this workflow from scratch. This is already created for you, and in this video, I'm going to show you how to install this and add your credentials and just let it start working for you. First, let's see this in action. I'm going to open this Webflow site in a new tab, and then I'm just going to submit this form here since it only has 2 fields. I'm going to pop in some random information. Let's send this request. Now, if we head over to Airtable, we can see that this submission that I just typed in, this random stuff, has been added. And then you'll notice that we have 2 tables here already. But what happens if we have a table that, a form that does not exist in our tables yet? So I'm going to take a form here, and I'm just going to fill this in real quick using the placeholders, just as a demonstration. I can speed this up, so don't have to. I'll make this a comma there. Okay, put a random number in here. Then any details will work. I'm just going to select forward for this, and maybe I put Raptor here as well. And okay, 2015. Okay, and then select some fields here. So now, if I send this submission and head over back to Airtable, we'll see that now we have a new table called car quote form, and this form submission is sent in here. And every time we submit that same form, it's going to be added in here. Now, at the end of this video, I'm going to show you exactly how this workflow works. I'm going to break down everything here. But first, let's start how to install it and add your credentials and just run it so it works for you. The quickest way to start is by creating our credentials. We'll start on this page and create our credentials. Now let's add our Webflow credential. From here, we'll add credential. I'm going to search for Webflow, choose Webflow API, click on continue. It's looking for an access token. We'll create one in Webflow. Go to Webflow and go to your site settings. We select apps and integrations. Then under API access, we need to generate a version 1 token. So this is the old way, but it's the only way that works. I'm going to copy this. Then we're going to go back to our N8N instance, and then we're going to add this token here, click on save, and there we go. So I'm going to call this Webflow to them access, just so that I know which credential it is or for which website it is. I save this, and there we go, it's done. Let's create a personal access token for Airtable. Click on add credential, search for Airtable, select personal access token API. Click on continue. It's asking for an access token. Let's create this in Airtable. Heading back to Airtable, we're going to add a new base from scratch, or you can select an existing base. I'm going to start, just to make it easy, with a new base. I'm going to call this Webflow Tutum site, just so I know. Leave the base as is. Then on the top right corner, head to Developer Hub. This will take you to this page. From here, select Personal Access Tokens. Then click on Create a New Token. We'll give this token a name, and we're going to say Webflow Form Notifications or Submissions, just so we know. For this, we need to look at what scopes to add. You can get this by heading to N8N. It looks like we need data records read, data records write, and also schema read. And in this case, we might need some more. Let's go back to Airtable. We'll add some scopes. First, we're going to add data records read. We need to be able to write. We don't need comments. We need schema. We need to read. We don't need to write schema. Base schema. Well, actually, we might need to write them because we need to create bases. So let's add that. And the others, okay. Add a base, the one we just created, to give access to. Then we'll create this token, and we'll copy it here. And now we can head back into N8N, and we can test if this token has worked. So we paste this in here, click on save. Okay, we have a connection. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to do personal access token for Tutum. Okay, now we can head back to our workflow and add our credentials. Now that our credentials are ready, let's import our workflow to N8N. Go to the blog post at the description of this video, then scroll down until you can find this workflow URL. I can click on into here and copy this, or I can click on this button to copy the URL. Head over to N8N, add a workflow. In the top right corner, expand the options and import from URL here. Paste the newer URL you got and import. Now we have our workflow on a canvas. Let's resolve these issues by connecting our credentials that we've created earlier. Let's start with adding Webflow credential. Let's open this. In the first dropdown, let's select the Webflow credential that we created earlier. Then we'll make sure to select the site, the relevant website. And in our case, this is copy of Tutum. That's just the name of our website in Webflow. Now, Airtable. We'll go to the first one. We'll open this and we select this credential, our personal access token. Then make sure from this list here, select the correct base. In our case, it's the same name here, so it worked out nicely. But click on this dropdown. If nothing appears, you can refresh this list and then select the dropdown and just select the correct base. Let's move on and fix all the other errors. This will just connect here like that. Do not edit any of the other fields here. You don't need to. Just add your credential. We'll do this last one. And okay, that one's done. And we'll just work backwards from here. Let's see, add our credential. This is the one we created earlier. Okay, for here, same thing. Let's open this. This is Airtable. So we need to select the credential for Airtable here. This is the personal access token. So we'll add this. Then we'll open this last one. Okay, there we go. So if I zoom out, we don't see any more errors, and we can save our workflow. You can also rename it to something more relevant to you, so you know what it is. And now we can activate it and start testing it. Now that we have our workflow with our credentials added and activated, let's test all three scenarios. The first scenario is starting with an empty base. We want to submit a form in Webflow, and we wanted to create a form index table and a table for our form in Webflow. We'll test this. We'll just pop in some random information. We're going to execute this. What we expect to see in Airtable is a form index table created and a record added, which is a reference to this table here, which is our Webflow form. So, and then we have our Webflow form submission, what we just filled in, added here. This is the first workflow. So this works. We head back to end-to-end. We can see the execution. If I could just go to the execution history here, and we look at the last one, that the flow has followed this bottom flow here. And then after this, I'll break down each one of the flows, and we'll go through each node and just understand how it all works. The second scenario is now that we have in Airtable, now that we have our table for our form and we have a form index table, we want to resubmit this same form, and we just wanted to add a record. I'm going to refresh this page, and this time I'm going to start with a different. I'm just going to add a bunch of queues so we can submit this. And in Airtable, what we expect to see is we should have, there we go, we should have a new record here, and this is the submission we just sent. The third scenario is that we try and submit a form that does not have a table here in our base yet. Okay, so right now we have one, and if I go back to Webflow here, and on this page there's another form, I'm just going to fill this in. I'll speed this up. Pop in the email here, just a number, random policy number is fine. We'll also call this premium, and I want to make a claim as our message, and I'll say no. Okay, I'll submit this. Now, in this scenario, in Airtable, we want to see a couple of things happening. In our form index, we have a new record, which is a reference to our new table for this form. This is the website claim form. It's been added as a new table, and our submission has been inserted in form content here. Then we have an index for it here. So all three scenarios work. Now let's go back through each scenario and break down node by node how this executes. Our first scenario was when we had an empty base in Airtable with no tables in it, and then we created a form index table and a table for our form submission. We started with this trigger. Whenever someone submits a form in Webflow, this trigger will activate our workflow. We receive the data from Webflow, and this is what it looks like. From here, we prepare the form submission for our workflow. This just means we reshape this data we receive from the trigger into something more familiar, an object familiar we can use throughout our workflow. Here, we send a request to Airtable to ask for the schema for our base. This brings back all the tables within our base, the one we gave permission to with our personal access token. Then, here's a block of code that just runs through the base and tries to look for a form index reference table. So this is the table inside our Airtable base, and it's called a form index, and it looks for it, and then it appends some more keys to our object to use later. From here, we run a test. Does that table exist? So the form table, does it exist? And this, when first time submitting it, it did not exist. So it will send null through here. So we know to follow this path. Here we have two HTTP requests. These are custom requests to the Airtable API. The first one, we create this table. So we use the same credentials, our personal access token. Then we submit an JSON object that will tell Airtable to create this form index table and create the specific columns that we need to use later. Once we've created this table, we create the second table, which is the Webflow form table. And this table will be used whenever we have a form, new form in Webflow, it will be added to this table. Okay, then here we just set some more information. We just append things to our object, our familiar object. Okay, and now finally, two things happen. We insert a new record, which is the reference. So this record we insert into the form index table is a reference to this table, the second table that we created here. If I head back to Airtable, we can just visualize this a bit better. So what this workflow did, it created this form index here, and that's this part of the workflow. So the first request here, this happened here. It created this table, then it creates the second table, which is the form table, this one here. This is the table that is the form, and this is the part that happens here. Then we just have a block of code that appends some specific information into our object here. Now we go back to this first table and we insert a record to it. So we reference the table that we create, the form index table, and then we insert this record, which is a reference to our, so sorry, here, let me just go back. It's this reference here. So I'm just going to add this here, and this will be used for the second execution. This information is important for our second execution. After this, we'll go back to end here. We insert the Webflow form content, so all of this data that we receive from the original submission. This is when we finally insert this into our Webflow form table, which we created here. Okay, let's look at the second workflow. What happens at this point when we do find a form index table? In our second execution, the first part checked if there is a form index table in our base schema. In this case, it did find one. So here we follow the true branch and we pass our object along to the workflow. Now that we know the form index table exists, we have its ID and we request to find a specific record. This record is the form ID that we receive from Webflow. It looks for, if I go back to Airtable here, it runs through, so it's found this table and now it runs through the records and it tries to find a matching form ID. In this case, it found it. And then we follow the next part. So I'll go back here. So we make this request. We just append to our object here that we can reuse and reference. And now a test. Does this Webflow form table exist? This form that we submitted, is there an existing table for it? By looking through the records within this form index table. In this case, it did find it. And then we simply go all the way to the end and we insert this form content into our table. We can have a look at that here. So it did find this record and there is an existing table for that form in Webflow, and now we just add a record for the submission. Let's look at the last scenario when there is no table for our Webflow form. In our third execution, this is when we do find a form index table in Airtable at this stage, but we do not find a record for this form that's been submitted. When this happens, so at this test, we check if there is a form, an existing form in the form index table. And if in this case it was false, so it was a new form that we submitted that's never been submitted before. And now we go back down this flow and we simply create a table for it. So this creates the Webflow form table and it uses the name of the form in Webflow to create this table. And in our second execution, this was the website claim form we submitted at the top here. It didn't exist in Airtable, but now it does. So I mean, this creates it. So we just split down, we didn't find the record for it, and then it follows down here. And again, now that it's created and in Airtable, we have a record of this. So our reference table here in form index has a record of this website claim form. Whenever we submit it, it already knows to send that submission to this table here. And if we execute this again, if we execute submit the same form again, then it will follow this flow here where, sorry, the second one here. It finds the form index table, it does find a record for it, and then in the end, it sends it the form content. It adds it as a record in that table.